Oh.
Make your way back in the room if you don't mind. And I'm going to introduce our next presenter.
I don't know if I changed my name. Could I change it?
Miss Andrée Taylor. She's been with the Legislative Auditor's Office since 2014, working in the area of local government services, developing and creating the Center for Local Government Excellence Training Initiative. So she was a very critical role in creating this program. She's seen it from the beginning to what it looks like today, and we're very proud of her for that accomplishment. Prior to working with LLA's Center for Local Government Excellence, Andrée was a small business management consultant and instructor in the Department of Management at Southeastern Louisiana University. Andrée has a master's in business administration with a concentration in accounting and is a certified public accountant. Please welcome Ms. Andrée Taylor.
Thank you. Can y'all hear me? And I do not have a BS, an AS, or anything else in technology. So thank you, Lizzie. Thank you, Marshall. Thank you, Liz, and everybody else who helps with the technology end of it. And one other thing, I am still working kind of in the background with CLGE, but I'm now Quality Assurance Research Manager, and I forgot to update my biography, so that's why it still says a lot about CLGE. But any of you that, when we started CLGE, it was in 2015, the fall of 2015 was our first session. And for those of you that were there at the very beginning to what has transpired since Diane has been here and really, you know, took the reins on this and really got everything going, and it's finally, you know, in the last couple of years what we intended the program to be when we initially started. So I'm very appreciative of that, and since this is my baby, I still like to help as much as I can. Okay, I think that Les asked you all how many of you work remotely, and I didn't see a whole lot of hands. Does anybody in here either work remotely? We have one person, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Anybody else? Or in a hybrid? Anybody work 100% remote? Okay. And then hybrid, where you can go in the office a couple of days? Okay. And then how many you have to be in the office every day? Okay. We are moving more towards a hybrid work environment, and I know within our office, when we started going back to the office, we've always had a flexible work schedule where if you want to work 4-10, you can work anytime between the hours of 6:30 a.m. and 6:30 p.m. And you know, you just have to coordinate it with your supervisor, with the other individuals that work with your team. Anybody, and a lot of individuals work 4-10s, and that's always been an option. It also has always been an option, even before the pandemic, that if you wanted to, you could work one day, you could telecommute one day a week, but the other 4 days you had to be in the office. So you couldn't do 4 10s and one of those 10s be working from home. You know, I think most of us, March 16th, which is that today? Yes. Okay, March 16th, we went home in 2020, and take your computers, take, you know, your files or whatever you think you might need, and, you know, we'll be out for a couple of weeks. Well, that turned into quite a few months, and in a lot of instances, people either have not gone back to the office totally, or they have formed some type of hybrid environment. Okay. Now, forget about what you're doing now or what the situation is now. And if your supervisors or if the head of your organization is in here, don't hold it against anybody. But if you were king or queen and you could determine what your work situation would be, how many of you would want to work 100% remote, you never ever had to go in the office? What if I told you you could work from anywhere in the world and work remote? Would that change anybody's opinion? Possibly. Okay. How many of you would prefer a few days a week in the office, maybe 2 or 3 days? if you could do that. That's my preference, because I like to be able to go in and see other people. And, you know, sometimes there's times, especially Diane and I, when we're talking about CLGE or collaborating on some things, we work well together with having the computer and talking amongst ourselves right there. Okay, how many of you always want to be, or at least for now, 100% in the office? Okay.
It closes and ends.
Well,
At the end of the day, it ends.
okay, and that's a really good point, and we're going to talk about what are some of the advantages and what are some of the disadvantages.
What did he say? What was the point?
He said that he likes going into the office because when the office closes, he's done. He's not thinking about it.
I should be done.
He should be done, exactly. And a lot of individuals, even before all of this, they would prefer to stay at the office until 5 or 6 o'clock, or, you know, 7 or 8 o'clock, because their rule or their feeling was that when I'm home, that's my time with my family, or on the weekends, I'm going to do whatever I have to during, you know, the hours at my office so that I don't have to take my computer, or I don't have to take my work home. Okay, I don't have a slide for this, but I want to make sure that we're all talking about the same thing. And when we talk about a hybrid workplace, essentially hybrid, whether it's remote or a few days a week, it's a flexible work structure. And some employees work at a central location, some team members work away from the office. It could be all of the time or sometimes. And I'm going to give you a term, and if you've looked at the slides, this is a term that I just learned a couple of, as I was preparing for this, and it's called being co-located. And that's what refers to when you're in the office or a central location. Now, when we're looking at a hybrid working environment, technology is going to be the primary way that we communicate, the primary way that we collaborate. And any of you that have been on Zoom meetings, and even we're, 3 years out from when we first started remote working, we still have issues with Zoom, or we still have issues with GoToMeetings or technology issues. So those are things that, you know, we need to take into consideration and kind of have a plan A, a plan B, and be flexible if we have to maybe reschedule certain meetings because of that. Mike Battle and Jennifer Shea yesterday, if you all were here, they talked about 3 different things regarding in-person settings or in-office settings. And the first one, they talked about communication. They talked about communication, they talked about trust, and then they talked about respect. Sorry about that. And so let's look at now what are some of the questions from our top leaders. First of all, how do we communicate effectively? Communication is going to be the basis of everything, as will trust. And then, how do we motivate our team? How are we going to motivate people that may have a lot of distractions going on, whether it's personally, whether it's physical distractions, emotional distractions, but how are we going to keep those employees motivated? I think that Jennifer talked yesterday about the lady that is the first person that you greet when you come into the legislative office, Miss Kathy. She is a ray of sunshine, but she knows when we may be having a bad day because she can maybe see it on our face, or maybe she's heard that the traffic's been horrible, or, you know, things like that. Well, you know, if you're working from home, those you're not going to have as much face-to-face collaboration, and you may not be able to tell just if you're just on the phone in terms of if somebody's having a bad day or if things are going well or not so well. And then, how do we align our expectations? We need to be as productive and as efficient as possible. Whether you're in the for-profit world or in the world of government that we're in, remember we talked about these are public funds. We've got to be good stewards of public funds. So as such, as we want to be as productive, we want to be as efficient as possible. And we'll talk in a couple of slides about the difference between effectiveness and efficiency. And then, how are we going to ensure high performance? How am I, as a leader, going to get the most out of my employees so that they're happy, content, and so that those employees that are really good for our organization, that are helping us to achieve our outcomes, how do we keep those employees? And how do we make sure that those employees that may be lagging behind, what can I as a leader do that can help those individuals? And Diane made this comment probably a couple of weeks ago, you know, when we were meeting, and she said, you manage projects and you lead people. We often, you know, call individuals managers, but and Jennifer even said it yesterday. She said, my, you know, coworker, my teammate, instead of saying, well, this person works for me. And Diane will, you know, say, oh, you know, Andrée and I work together. And it seems like a simple thing, but it really does kind of change the thinking of the individuals that you're working with. Okay, let's look at effectiveness. That's the degree, am I doing the right thing? Am I doing the right thing to produce a desired result? And then efficiency, am I doing things the right way and using the least amount of resources? Okay, think about in the game of golf. Effectiveness is the ball getting into the hole or the cup with the flag. That's, you know, kind of our desired result. Okay, well, it may have taken me 30 strokes to get, you know, it should have taken me 3 strokes, a par 3, it took me 30 strokes. Well, am I effective? Yeah, if all I wanted to do was get the ball in that hole. Am I efficient? No, I don't think I'd be ready to go on the LPGA tour. Efficiency would be if I got a hole in one, or the least amount of strokes that I can use to be able to get that end goal. Now, I asked my dad, this was several years ago, and probably 20 or 30 years ago, Daddy, how can you play golf every day, you've been doing it for years and years, and not necessarily improve your score? And his response, well, if you're doing it the wrong way, then you really get good at doing it wrong. So if you haven't started with effectiveness, where you know that you're doing the right thing, then efficiency, again, you're just going to be really good at doing the wrong thing. And I don't know if any of you guys have seen any of the movies. It was originally in black and white. It was about Frank and Lillian Gilbreth, and it was Cheaper by the Dozen. And back in the 40s and 50s, it was all about how can we be as efficient as possible, how can we streamline processes. Well, that's good if that's what your result is going to be, that, you know, it doesn't matter about quality, we're just going to get 500 widgets made in the next hour. Well, how many of those 500 widgets are going to work? And so those are the things that we need to consider. When we talk about effectiveness in management, that's the capability of management. We want to achieve desired targets in the specified amount of time. We're looking at doing what's right, what should be done, but we also want to have, as we kind of scale up or as we get used to maybe doing a quality control review or you know, looking at doing bank reconciliations. How can we streamline the process or get more efficient? Or if we're teaching somebody how to do it, we need to teach them the right way first, and then we can look at, okay, now let's see, can you do more than one, you know, every day or one every 5 hours, whatever it is. If you have 50 bank accounts and you're trying to reconcile all of those bank accounts, you need to get to kind of economies of scale and efficiency at some point. But again, it starts with making sure that you're effective. Let me ask you guys this, and you don't have to raise your hand, but just think about it. On a scale of 1 to 5, if 1 is not effective and 5 is effective, if we're talking about doing the right things, does your supervisor actually do the right things to help you or to help your team succeed? Just kind of think about that. And if you are a supervisor, let's go the opposite way. And are you doing think about it. Am I helping my employees or the individuals that I work with to succeed? You've got to be able to define success. But in most instances, employees that are engaged are more productive, meaning they feel like a part of the team. They're not dreading coming into work every day. They're not constantly looking for other jobs. If your organization has a lot of turnover, now there are some industries that have a higher turnover rate than others. If you're considering at fast food places, I don't know their actual turnover rate, but I know at other organizations it may be 10%. You want to look to see if my turnover rate is 10%, but others, and you can talk amongst yourselves with other agencies that are the same size, you can ask them, what's your turnover rate? And if yours is much higher, you need to look at, is it a particular manager? I was in pharmaceutical sales, and an individual that was a micromanager, we had several people in, I think there were 8 reps within this manager's territory. And not only did several reps, I think in the course of 2 years, 5 out of the 8 reps left. Now, on exit interviews, nobody said he's a micromanager, we don't like working for him. Nobody wanted to burn their bridges. But in human resources, they should have realized, okay, 5 people leaving in 8 years, in 2 years out of the 8. We even had one representative that moved from, I think it was Chicago, to Phoenix, Arizona. And those who knew the individual well, we knew, yes, I would think maybe Phoenix is, a warmer climate, but his family had been, not wife and kids, but his extended family was in Chicago, and the main reason why he left, and he figured, okay, well, I'll transfer at some point, surely this manager's not going to be here forever. So it's up to human resources, or if you're a manager and somebody who's working with you, if they're losing a lot of employees, you need to look to see what's causing that, and is it the employees, and are we hiring the right people? We're going to talk about trust in a second, and you're going to see that when we talk about trust, that we're going to need to look at, exactly, are we hiring the right people? If you don't trust your employees, you need to look at what are my hiring policies, or who am I hiring? Because ideally, you want to hire people that you trust and then get out of the way and give them the tools they need and let them get to work doing it. Okay, in terms of when we looked at the different work models, when we're truly effective at work, we actually are managing our time well, we're communicating clearly. Again, most of the sessions that we have had, not just in this CLGE, but in previous ones, communication, trust, and respect were 3 buzzwords that really infiltrate all of the different classes or sessions that we're talking about. And what's more important, effective workers are the most respected and most productive. They're often the first ones to actually be considered for promotions. I know that none of you are like this, but you may know somebody that all they do is complain. They don't like their manager, they don't like their coworkers, they don't like the commute that they have. Every day it's a litany of, kind of woe is me. Well, you really only have two, if you're in that situation, or your friend, you only have 2 choices. You can either change your situation or you can change your attitude, because you are kind of fostering negativity within your group and within your organization. And that's no fun. Bitterness and anger, that doesn't look good on anybody. So you really need to kind of, examine, if this is not for me, if I'm so miserable, especially right now, there are a lot of other jobs that are out there. And maybe you need to sit down with your supervisor. Maybe it's not that maybe you really like the organization, but maybe it's the job that you're doing that either you're not good at, you haven't been trained for, you feel like you need more to help you succeed. We talked about the different work models, and again, co-located employees, that's essentially the way that is the most traditional way to work and what has been the norm. Again, having been in pharmaceutical sales I did that for 13 years, and I worked for small companies, so I was the only rep within I covered Louisiana, Mississippi, and so we had meetings, our whole organization, a couple of times a year. And one thing that they would do, and at first, when we first did it, I thought, why are they spending money and why are we doing this? But it was scavenger hunts or things like that where you were with people not just within your division who you may talk to on a regular basis, but with people from across the country. You learned a lot because you got to see how competitive people were, how much people were willing to cut corners or to fudge things so that they could win. And it was also a fun way to, people let their guards down. And it really helped in terms of people getting together. Well, so for me, not being with everybody on a day-to-day basis, that was something that I was used to. I went into offices, doctor's offices all the time, and I thought, well, how can this be a lonely job because I'm with people all the time? But it wasn't the camaraderie that you build or kind of the synergy that you build with individuals that, that you work with more regularly. And then remote employees, we've talked about, it could be 100% telecommute. And again, I have several friends that work for companies that they can telecommute 100%, and they can work from anywhere that they'd like to. So, if they want to work from, now they can't be sitting on the beach with their toes in the sand and, getting their computer full of salt water. But if they'd like to, be at the beach for a week and, their office window happens to look out onto the beautiful Gulf of Mexico, as long as they're meeting their productivity goals and getting their work done, then that's allowed. And then hybrid employees, a flexible work structure. Typically it's 2 to 3 days in the central office, and then the rest of the week people will telecommute. I personally, if I was given the option, and I live in Hammond, so my telecommute, and you'll see when I give you some figures on what it cost, kind of kept me up last night when I looked at the real dollars. But I commute from Hammond and our office is downtown. And fortunately, we can telecommute 2 days a week. So even if Diane said, Andrée, you really work kind of on projects by yourself, come in, whenever you want. I would still like to come in at least 2 to 3 days a week because I enjoy the people that I work with. I have other coworkers that they'd be perfectly content telecommuting 100% of the time. But I feel like they are different, people that I can learn from, and even just in terms of it being sometimes less formal when you get to know people. You feel more comfortable with them. Amazon, over the last probably year, and some of the other big tech companies, I think that Elon Musk, I think that he made a lot of the employees, I think it's Twitter that he bought, right? Is it Twitter? I'm not a big fan of social media, but anyway, he came in and he said everybody's coming back to the office. Well, people had been working from home 100% of the time. In a lot of tech industries, they can do that. Amazon did some of the same things, and I have a friend that was living in Dallas, worked for Amazon in the technology end, and they actually made him move to Seattle. They said, we're having our employees, you can't work remotely 100% of the time. You have to be in the office, on an occasional basis or a couple of days a week. He's been there for 6 months. He's been in the office 2 times in 6 months. Seattle is a lot more expensive to live in than what Dallas is, and the cost of them even moving him up there. And so he's considering, is this really worth it for me? Or are there other jobs that maybe I can move back to Dallas and telecommute 100% of the time? So Companies have to consider that when they're looking at whether they're going to pull employees back in or to what extent. And can those jobs be done remotely, or is it a job that you have to be in person to actually do that job? In a study last year that Gallup poll did, the U.S., the individuals, and it was several thousand that were actually surveyed. 22% said that they would prefer to be in the office full-time. 42% said they'd prefer to be fully remote, and then 36% actually came back with a sort of a preferred hybrid model. Okay, what are some reasons that you think, or that you can think of, that would make remote leading or teamwork or working at a distance so challenging? Or what are your major challenges or concerns if you're in a position that you could determine if someone that works with you would telecommute or work in a hybrid environment?
Productivity.
Okay. What else? Yes, sir.
Just the entire socialization process for teamwork.
Okay. Oh, okay. He said productivity is one of the concerns, and then the socialization aspect of it. I know that all of us in this room are no older than 30, so I was waiting if anybody would catch it. In my mind, I am 30. I think I might be 36 now in my mind. Haven't gotten to 40 yet. But a lot of individuals who are in their 20s, they have grown up, and possibly early 30s, they have grown up with using this technology. Yale and some of the Ivy League schools they have classes on interpersonal communication and interpersonal communication skills, because those individuals that are coming out of college, all they know how to do is look at those phones. And a lot of companies are having to develop communication skills within the employees that they actually hire. Lizzie, I think we have a communication. Don't we have a communication class?
We do.
Okay. And I have been with the organization for 8 years. I got an invitation to go to this communication class. And I asked Lizzie, is there a problem with my communication skills? And she said, no. She said, you probably just didn't take it when you first started. And I did not. So, but I'm looking forward to it, because I would bet, had I taken that course in 2014, and the bulk of what the course is now, I would imagine that it's going to be different, especially since we've had more people telecommuting and more people working in different environments. If you're going to consider a hybrid work environment, you need to look at, first of all, what are the business needs? Again, we're stewards of public funds, so you know, if it's not making sense for our organization and for how productive we can be, then it is, we're not being good stewards of those particular funds if it's going to make us less efficient or less effective. What are the employee preferences? And then again, technical capabilities. A couple of the reasons why a lot of the remote teams may fail, and again, you know, really starting in 2020, and now we've got 3 years worth of data to look back on, we've got some pretty good data on, you know, why teams have failed. And one of them is failing to recognize that working at a distance we need to present, or will present, new challenges, and it's going to require a new mindset. A little later on in the presentation, I've got a chart for you, and it actually shows what's the old mindset and how do we have to change our thinking right now. And then believing that virtual teams mimic face-to-face solutions, and it overlooks the complexity of virtual teamwork. Also, a lot of times there's no training for virtual team leaders, and the members, it's also lacking. I'm not going to say exactly what happened in this situation, but I would bet that you all have heard about this young lady. When when people first started doing Zoom meetings, she was doing it on her cell phone. She didn't realize that her camera was on, and she went into the ladies' room. So everybody on her team, the 5 or 10 people, it was quite an embarrassing thing. And I don't know if that's still up on YouTube or TikTok or one of those, but it went viral for quite a while. I don't know if she ever lived it down. I don't know if she's still with that organization, but it was, definitely an embarrassing situation. And then virtual teams often don't take the time to invest in relationships. They just drive quickly to the task. Just as simple as me telling you guys the story about my dad and what we had talked about. That's a way of investing in relationships. You all now know a little bit more about me. And then some challenges that virtual teams face are not problems that we want to solve, but problems that actually need to be managed. Okay, let's say, and if any of you guys know him, you know he's not, Mike Battle is shy, and he never offers his opinion. He's turning red. And he never offers his opinion while we're in virtual meetings. But I offer my opinion all the time, and I have no problem speaking up. Well, Diane, as our leader and director of local government services, she needs to manage that virtual meeting so that Mike begins to speak up and that it's not just Andrée Taylor's opinions that are heard. And it really is the leader of that particular group that it's going to fall on to make sure that people are included. Some of the challenges. Not feeling like you're part of the team or you're part of the organization's culture. The next one is lack of feedback or growth opportunities. And these would be challenges or issues for actual employees. Okay, what time is it? I'm trying to check my time. And then lack of trust we're going to talk about lack of trust, but lack of trust in the technology or misunderstanding it. I have no idea whether our organization records every click that we have on our computer, that whether or not they're monitoring, how many times is your computer open. I have no idea. I would bet that more than 50% of the individuals in our organization, they honestly believe that, Mike Wagaspack is looking through everybody's computer and he knows exactly how much time everybody's working on each project. I trust, so I don't believe that that's true. Diane, do you have the time to sit there and, monitor? No, but Diane trusts the employees that work with her. And that really, you'll see, that's got to be the basis for this to even be remotely possible to work. And then misunderstanding or conflict amongst the teams. You've got to kind of monitor that. If you see that people are getting heated, or that in meetings, whether it's in person or whether it's virtually, that you have individuals that are maybe attacking the person instead of what the issue is, or maybe playing devil's advocate, but being a little too zealous about playing devil's advocate. And lack of trust, and we're going to talk about what that actually means or how that manifests. Lack of information, and then less access to work resources and to equipment. Also, a decreased ability to collaborate. When individuals first start in an organization, they want to feel like part of a team. And a lot of times, we don't want to admit what we don't know, or we don't want to ask questions, whereas if you're in the office, you can maybe do it a little less formally, but if you're doing it remotely, then you've either got to send an email or you've got to talk with somebody. You've got to do it a little more formally, to where you've got to be vulnerable, admit, I don't know the answer to this particular question. We talked about the lack of feedback and growth opportunities. Jennifer may have mentioned this, or Mike may have mentioned this yesterday, I'm not sure, but there's another kind of buzzword or a term that's been popular, and it's called proximity bias. And this is really a real thing. It's our tendency to give preferential treatment to those that are in our immediate vicinity. And I've seen this with, you know, I've got a lot of nephews and I'll go to their sporting events. And especially in football or in soccer, I'll often see them, they may not be first string or, you know, they may not be playing, but I'll often see them kind of like following the coach around. Well, you know, that's a way to say, hey, I'm here, put me in. And a lot of times the coach is like, you know, whoever happens to be closest, that's the ones that go in. So in an office setting, if you can meet and talk with someone more than other people, it may lend a better growth or a better opportunity position for those people that are in the office. If everybody's remote, that's not an issue. If everybody's in the office, that's not an issue. It's when you have some people in the office, some people that are working remote, then there tends to be more of a proximity bias situation. Okay, as a supervisor, again, out of sight, out of mind, we're back to the proximity bias. Establishing personal bonds or connections. You know, you may not be able to just kind of sit and find out how is somebody's day, how is the day going for someone. And then coaching and development at a distance. It may take a while for you as a supervisor to realize that you have an employee that's floundering if he or she is not comfortable with either being vulnerable or asking for help. And then communicating via technology. Oh, we also talked about the difficulty in measuring productivity, and some things, you know, if you're managing a call center, you can see how many calls, you know, is coming in and how many calls did this person handle per day. But it's not quite as easy if you have people that are working on projects or audits or things like that. So you often have to come up with a way, and a lot of times it's, okay, and we'll talk about setting clear expectations, but I need you to do A, B, C, and D, and I need it done by such and such date. And a lot of bosses that are not, or supervisors that are not micromanagers, they'll tell you what they want, they'll be very clear about it, they'll give you a deadline, and as long as you're meeting those deadlines and producing good results, then they don't have the need or feel the need to micromanage you. And then we talked about lack of trust, we'll talk about it again. Also, you've often got to have more patience if you're in that particular situation. Okay, I've got till 11:10, right? Okay, also more difficult to coordinate work, to coordinate schedules, tasks, and timelines. Some organizations have found it beneficial to say, okay, on Wednesday or on Thursday, you can telecommute or work remotely 3 days out of the week, but everybody in the organization on Wednesdays needs to be here. In that way, people know if they need to schedule meetings, they don't even have to look at your calendar. You're going to be here Wednesday unless you're on vacation, unless you're ill, something like that. Okay, let's look at some of the advantages and the disadvantages. I'm sorry, we looked at the disadvantages, let's look at the advantages. And I handled the disadvantages first so you can see some of the positive advantages of it. First of all, employers, if you can have fewer offices or office space, then you can often reduce your overhead. Reduced absenteeism, and we'll look at, you know, and you may say, well, if somebody's sick, somebody's sick. How does that reduce absenteeism? If I have a cold, I'm probably not feeling bad enough to where I can't work, but our office is not very well ventilated. I definitely don't want someone that's in the cubicle next to me to come to work if they have a cold, if they have the flu, if they're not feeling well. So in that instance, if I'm going to do the responsible thing, I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to take the day off work. If I can work from home, then I feel well enough to work, I can get some work done. And so again, fewer days that I have to take off, my productivity improves. Also, just in terms of if you have doctor's appointments. Again, I live in Hammond. my office is in Baton Rouge. If I can't telecommute at all, I probably have to, for a 4 o'clock doctor's appointment in Hammond, I have to leave downtown probably, you know, around 2, definitely no later than 2:15 or 2:30. So I usually work 9 to 6:30. That's 4 hours or 4.5 hours that I've lost productivity because I've had to come into the office. I may only lose an hour of productivity if I can work from Hammond and then just take off a couple of hours in the afternoon. And that kind of goes along with the increased productivity. Flexibility and agility for employees makes us happier, increased productivity, and then employee retention. Okay, probably the biggest benefit, or one of the biggest benefits to employees, is cost and time savings. Studies have been done, and the average savings is $7,000 a year in terms of transportation costs, wear and tear in your car, especially with gas going up as it has. Last night I looked at if I would have to be in the office 100% of the time. Right now the IRS allows you 62.5 cents per mile, 5 days a week. That is $312 a week that it would cost me if I have to come to Baton Rouge because it's 100 miles round trip. Over 46 weeks a year, so I'm saying that there's going to be time off and vacation and holidays and things, that's $14,000. Just by me being able to telecommute 3 days a week, or only having 3 days in the office and 2 days a week, that drops it down to $187 a week, and it goes from $14,000 down to $8,600. So you can see that, and I didn't really realize this until I was kind of looking at the numbers, because when I heard yesterday 7,000, thinking, that sounds like a lot. Well, it actually does when you look at that. Now, am I having to pay out of my pocket the $8,600? No, but the wear and tear on my car, I probably put 25,000 miles a year on my car. And depreciation with cars happens pretty quickly. If you were in our previous session, the previous session that I did on conflict, we talked about trust, commitment, accountability, and results as kind of the behaviors of a cohesive team. And we talked about connection. That's really important. Do you feel seen and heard? Can you give and receive without judgment? Do you derive sustenance and strength from the relationship? Trust is going to be the foundation of what you actually need. Now, building trust is going to be one of the biggest challenges of managing remote employees. A lot of times people feel if you can't see them, then how do I know that they're working? Well, it's going to start with, the best advice I can give you is it's going to start with assuming positive intent. You act under the assumption that the person with whom you're meeting is trustworthy and a team player. They share your desire for the best possible outcome for the organization. Essentially, you fake it till you make it. You act as if that employee or that coworker is going to behave in an effective and positive way. If you're failing to trust your employees, you could be failing to develop the workplace that's positive and that caters to the strengths of your employees. You may need to talk with, if your human resources department is you, have a good look in the mirror and think about it, or you may have to talk with your human resources department. And you need to communicate from the highest level of your organization that you trust your employees. If you don't, again, you need to go back and see, okay, what's the reasoning, why don't I? A couple of actual steps, and there's a lot of information on the next bunch of slides, but I want to give you something, and I saw some individuals actually have their slides all bound in a nice manual, and I was complimenting them. They said, well, because when I get home, I want to put this up on the shelf, and if I need something on any of the topics that you've talked about, I know exactly where they are. So the most important thing you want to do is set clear expectations. That's the most fundamental element of employee engagement. How frustrating is it when you've got to go back and forth with either the person who works with you or the person that you work for because the expectations or the instructions weren't clear. You've spent 4 or 5 hours doing something, and that's not really what they wanted you to do in the first place. Or maybe they're doing the same project or the same thing also. We can go through some of these, but a lot of these you can look at on your own, but you want to be fully present and fully engaged, whether you're in meetings, whether it's in person. One way that you can increase your productivity by up to 40%, turn off the notifications on your phone or your email, and again, you can look to see, just by turning off those notifications, every time we get a ding on our phone, it's a rush of dopamine. That's not done to make us more productive. That's done so that we want to keep going to those social media accounts or those Facebook or, you know, whatever the situation is, or whoever's trying to sell you something or get you involved with it. So you really need to think about what can I do to, you know, even if it's just for an hour, or putting do not disturb. If you have same time chat or, you know, or things like that, you can put do not disturb or I'm in a meeting, so that you have some time that you have, excuse me, that you have allotted for this particular item. Or so you can do some concentrated thinking. Individual check-ins, again, not just, hey, are you doing your work, but more so, are you okay with working from home? Or do you have what you need? Am I giving you what you need to actually be successful? And encourage, when we talk about multi-channel, that means have Zoom meetings, possibly, you know, make sure like once a week the cameras are on, just so that you can kind of, you know, see people and get a feel of either their tone of voice or what the expressions are on them. Schedule weekly team meetings only for those who need to be in the meetings. Don't just schedule weekly meetings to say, hey, we're, you know, actually having a meeting. Also, when you're going to be in meetings, you want to gather purposefully. So when should the team get together in person? Are we starting a new project, or things a lot more detailed, or maybe it's a critical project, then we may need to meet on a regular basis. Designate communication channels. Again, are we going to use Zoom? Are we going to do email? Will, you know, and also, what are the expectations for what times of the day or how often you're expecting people you work with to check their email? Mike, I have a quick question for you. If I sent you an email at 10 or 11 o'clock at night, not a text, but an email, does your phone ding to let you know?
No, I have it on silent.
Okay, Diane, yours does? Okay, that's good to know, because I may be, you know, just kind of thinking about something that I need for the next day, and I can check, you know, email and everything on my phone. I'm glad that I'm not sending Diane emails, and I thought Mike, because he deals with a lot of the legislators, I thought maybe you know, would get it. And it was probably 10 or 11 o'clock, and so I waited until the next morning. I typed out the email so I wouldn't forget, but I waited to hit send the next morning. So you want to find out, you know. Now, I definitely don't expect Diane, if I send her an email, to respond to me at 10 or 11 o'clock at night, but I'm glad that I know that I don't want to send it even if I'm not expecting a response, because she's going to be disturbed while she's at home. And then prioritize outcomes over activities. Again, don't just give people work for it to be busy work. Okay, I've got to wrap up. I've got 1 minute. But make sure that, you know, you consider what are the habits that people have, who works better at certain times, and take those things into consideration. Okay, balance distractions. I talked about the, you know, reducing the notifications. Also, my dog, and this was a hint that I got from another webinar that I watched. My dog will sleep all day long. When I get on a phone call with Diane or another coworker, Morley starts barking. So there are two things that'll work. I can put a sound machine on for her, or I can give her a bone, and, you know, that'll at least, you know, get her off. But it can be very distracting, not just for me, and if that doesn't work, then I've got to put her outside, because I don't want, when we're in meetings, for my dog to cause distractions for everybody else. Instill independence, let people decide if you possibly can on their schedules, on what days they're going to telecommute. And then practice patience and empathy. Again, we're all kind of learning together. Even though it's been 3 years, things are constantly in a state of change or flux. And then more trust, more proactivity, forced interactions, multiple tools, and then new ways of thinking about communication. And I think, okay, my time is up. I told y'all too many stories about golf and about my dad, but thank the good Lord, my parents are still both alive, so I'm very fortunate. I've got enough information on the slides. It gives you the tips. It gives you what to do, how to do it, and hopefully that'll be, if any of you guys have any questions, my information is on the bottom or on the last slide. And Les talked about a lot of the issues with cybersecurity and remote working, so some of that is repeated in what I had. Thank you guys, and I appreciate your attention.